Going on, Jabroner Nation? It's your boy Jabroni Crayon here, and in this week's video we're going to be discussing an absolute classic title of mine, one that we spoke about briefly in our tier list the other day on stream, Darkest Dungeon, but really more specifically Darkest Dungeon 2 wishlist, what I would like to see added to the game, revamped, overhauled, to make it one of the best experiences out there for roguelikes. So first thing up, boys, I think we want to see a revamped, like, macro game. When it comes to Darkest Dungeon 1, I mean, your whole experience happens in the Hamlet, which, look, those regions and that exploration was pretty fun, but I think it's pretty obvious from the teaser trailer we got, we're going to the Mountains of Madness, and we have to carry some kind of torch, like the logo of the game, to somewhere in the Mountains of Madness. We couldn't really infer much from this trailer, but the reality is it seems like, based on what the devs said in their interview on Darkest Dungeon 2, that they want to really change the way that the game is sort of paced and moves and flows. And by this, I kind of got the vibe that maybe it's not going to be so much a stationary adventure. We're going to be carrying this torch, and we're going to be going on a journey through the Mountains of Madness, which I think would be an amazing idea. I would love to see this, because the reality is, staying in the Hamlet, upgrading it, didn't feel that different throughout the course of the game, but like going through new environments, picking, you know, if you want to go through a swampland or a desert or like a dense jungle, all Lovecraftian style, of course, would be a really interesting choice to make. I could see it being like a Mario Galaxy style kind of vibe, not like, you know, like colorful and happy and shit, but I mean like you pick which planet, so to speak, environment you want to traverse through while you inevitably end up toward this X. Think of like what is it, Slay the Spire, where you kind of pick the journey you go through to get to the top of the spire. If we could see that in Darkest Dungeon, I think it would give that roguelike vibe even more, and you would get a lot more variety in terms of enemy types, factions, and shit you could come across. What if you could like pick to go through like an ancient ruins, and maybe you would get some kind of boon and some curse by doing that? Or you could pick to go through like, you know, a more chill, safe route, and get more merchants and trading. I mean, making these kinds of choices is something that kind of drives the fun and addiction of Darkest Dungeon. So having the ability to make like lasting choices that kind of impact the caravan, I'm assuming we're going to go with the caravan kind of style. That's what I would love to see, because that could have all sorts of implications in terms of like how you upgrade your camp, how you get your people geared up, how you protect the flame that you're carrying, the torch. What does that mean? What does that imply? I feel like they could really get into that in terms of ambushes and all sorts of new game events. So overall, I think we would just like to see an updated metagame, because I think it would just make the game a lot more exciting, and I think you could go a lot further by being on the move than you could by being stationary just on the manor. Okay, so my next thing I'd love to see is a combat overhaul and some kind of like deepening. Look, Darkest Dungeon 1 combat was pretty straightforward. It wasn't super shallow, but because you had this basic one-line linear kind of setup, you usually had the tanky guy up front, the squishies in the back, and your attack order didn't vary that much from enemy to enemy. And it really wasn't all that different besides the classes you took. But what if we could like amp this up by adding a row-based system you see in like Final Fantasy, or some kind of way to add more depth and complexity to the combat? I mean, adding some kind of real-time decision-making might be against and counterintuitive to a turn-based combat system. But the Darkest Dungeon 2 devs said that they were willing to really shake things up, and it's not going to necessarily be just Darkest Dungeon like 1.5. They're really going for a whole new combat system, and I feel like this is going to imply maybe just adding things that kind of blend the turn-based and real-time kind of attack styles together. You might be against that, but I could actually see this being really interesting given the sanity system in the game. Maybe you have to make split-second decisions to help your character or hurt them. I could see them going crazy with this. Bottom line, I would love to see the combat in Darkest Dungeon 2 just go that extra level. And we'll get into it in a bit, but like obviously guys, in our next point, we want to see some new fucking classes. I mean, that's probably your favorite thing about the game, if you've played it. If you haven't played it, you need to check it out. It's on Steam, it's on sale all the time, it's extremely cheap, and it's an extremely addictive, replayable masterpiece. Okay, So at the bottom of the screen you see here, you see a bunch of different classes, and there were a ton in the original game. But I mean, Darkest Dungeon 2 could bring back these OGs, polish them up, give them some new bells and whistles, but take them to that next level. I mean, what if we saw like a pirate type class, or a hunter with a bow, and like, you know, like maybe a hound, maybe they could merge some of the classes from the original game to create new ones. Or maybe you could do that, the player in the game. That could be some real fucking Fire Emblem type shit. Or maybe you could have like relationships between heroes. I mean, having them be more of a camaraderie and having them kind of rely on each other, I think would be a lot more interesting. Um, Having like, you know, maybe they can't get married, but like having them have relations, they care if somebody gets hurt or dies, their sanity breaks. It could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing, and I think just adding to that, that could just go further into the complexity of the game, of the combat system, and just make the character progression feel a lot more intricate. So I would love to see some new classes get added to the game, guys. My final point for a Darkest Dungeon 2 wishlist would probably be just a revamped item system. So Darkest Dungeon 1 items were pretty fun. They had the kiss curse kind of mechanic, and they did shake up a character to some extent. But if I'm being honest, you had like two choices, like two slots, and you know, there was some variety, but I think we could all agree that could go way deeper. I mean, beyond just taking new abilities for your characters and separate abilities, which is awesome, they got to bring that back and maybe even go even further with that. Um, Being able to visually see when we change a character's items, we put a necklace on a character, we should see that necklace. When we give a knight a new sword, we should see that sword. Like, these things should be visual as much as they are like numerical and metric based, because it just gives that character a lot more identity and you're a lot more attached if they ever fall in battle. I feel like that'd be a lot more exciting. Losing those items, losing the character, giving them a name, customizing them beyond just recolor and name. Give them a backstory. Allow us to give our characters relationships, backstories, just all sorts of like customization options. I think would give you a lot more attachment to your character. You would care a lot more if you lose them. You'll also just like be a lot more invested in the game and in the groups that you're taking into these dungeons. So that's shit I would like to see. In addition to an item revamp, I mean, I would like to be able to hold more than 2 items. I don't know about you, but I would love to be able to really just get into it, into the nitty gritty from top to bottom, armor, weapons, trinkets. I really want to see them go wild with that, because I think that's what like Darkest Dungeon lives and dies on, is the loot and in the you know, the Lovecraftian vibe. So guys, that's going to wrap up my Darkest Dungeon 2 wishlist. Quick video. It's kind of a side thing that I love to play on the side. I love some indie titles, and this game is absolutely no exception to that. Be sure to check it out if you haven't already. I'm curious to see in the comments below what you would like to see in Darkest Dungeon 2, if you've ever played it, the original, and if you guys want to see more content like this, I'm happy to drop more indie type game videos for the YouTube in the future.